Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys. Hopefully this isn't too loud. I really don't want to go through a few videos and then find out my fan was drowning out everything I said. Hope everyone's doing well. Let's get started. Next episode. Perkele? Episode 16. Finland strikes back. World War II. 15th of December, 1939. Preemptive like. Horrible intro. Let's just get into it. Hi, guys. Hope you're all doing well. Let's learn.
Uh-huh. Do it.
Oh, God. What was the order?
December 15th, 1939. David versus Goliath, a classic confrontation of the small versus the mighty. Of course, there is most often no fairy tale ending, and the mighty crushes the small, but this week, it's just like the very first time. This week, David wins.
Did you know that the sculpture David is actually about David in the David versus Goliath story? To some of you, that might be really obvious, but to me, I had no idea.
I'm Indy Nidell. This is
Andy.
World War II. Last week, the Soviet invasion of Finland really got going, though the Finns were holding off the attackers, and doctors were overseeing the deaths of mental patients in occupied Poland. There is another offensive going on besides the Soviet one this week. On December 10th, Chinese nationalist forces attacked the Japanese on Henglingguan Pass, south of Jingshan in northern China. Over the next 3 weeks, this attack will drive the Japanese out of the region. The Chinese also attack Jingshan itself, and though the Japanese mount a strong counterattack, the Chinese will succeed in taking Longhua near Yisheng next week. On the 13th, the Chinese 47th Corps captures Taihang Mountain and cut the Taoxin Railway, taking the stations at Pashan and Changkou. That same day, the Chinese launch an offensive in eastern Shaanxi province and nearly encircle the Japanese 36th Division. One army that had scored a victory over the Japanese a few months ago was the Soviet Red Army. It's a pretty unknown quantity at this point. I mean, sure, they'd had that big victory at Khalkhin Gol, but the Japanese they were fighting were used to fighting barefoot Chinese with no air support and almost no armor. They had been stunned by the Russian Air Force and then a blitzkrieg-style campaign on the wide-open Mongolian plains. Well, Finland, where the Red Army is now fighting, is as far as you could get from wide-open Mongolian plains. Still, Soviet
Russia is so freaking big.
Defense Commissar Kliment Voroshilov believed that the war would only take the soldiers and reserves on hand in the Leningrad military district to win. There were, of course, generals that disagreed, but Joseph Stalin that the war would only take the soldiers and reserves on hand in the Leningrad military district to win. There were, of course, generals that disagreed, but Joseph Stalin was not worried and dismissed their reports. This is from the memoirs of N.N. Voronov, Chief Marshal of the Artillery. In late November, he went to Kirill Meretskov's headquarters to meet with Artillery Officer Kulik and Commissar Meklis. They asked him about stocking up ammunition for the artillery for the coming Finland campaign. Voronov said it all depends how long they plan for the operation. They said 10 to 12 days. Voronov had, in fact, looked at a map of Finland, and he didn't at all buy this. He said this is going to take 2 or 3 months. Kulik and Meklis laughed at this and told him to just base his assumptions on no more than 12 days for the whole operation. Well, this week sees those first 12 days come and go, and the winter war is just getting going. On the 9th, the Finns stopped the Soviet 9th Army near Suomussalmi. 2 days later there, the entire Soviet 163rd Division is cut off. The Red Army forces are much larger, but reinforcements have to come down a narrow earth road surrounded by impenetrable forest. The Finns send out ski patrols by night to go behind the front and attack and destroy enemy supply columns. Thing is, the Red Army is woefully under-equipped for a winter war. There are divisions issued manuals on ski tactics, but no skis. It took several weeks for the Soviets to even get around to painting their tanks white to blend in with the snow. But in the south, on the Karelian Isthmus, the only place where you could have large-scale military maneuvers, they attack again at Taipale on the 14th. This starts with a heavy pre-dawn artillery barrage. The Finnish artillery does not respond. At 11:30, the barrage stops, and 50 tanks in two formations, followed by an entire infantry division, advance on the Finns. The tanks open fire. But then, so now does the Finnish artillery, which has, like last week, pre-plotted the entire region, and it breaks up the Soviet advance in 5 minutes, forcing their quick retreat, leaving behind the burning wrecks of 18 tanks.
Guys, so you see how the
So now does the Finnish
see how the white covering of this artillery is blown off right here?
artillery, which has
And so covering things like artillery and having soldiers have white uniforms and covering stationary or artillery in white canvassing to make it blend in makes sense. But would painting a tank white, a tank that's this hulking, loud, monstrous mechanical beast, really, is it more for hiding it when it's stationary? Because when you're moving with the tank, I feel like it's pretty obvious where you're going. But maybe from an aircraft's point of view, it's a lot more difficult. And so why make it more easy? What do I know? I just wonder if
like
anyways.
last week, pre-plotted the entire region, and it breaks up the Soviet advance in 5 minutes, forcing their quick retreat, leaving behind the burning wrecks of 18 tanks. Taipale was a slaughterhouse for the Russians. The last half kilometer of any approach to the Finnish lines had to be made across wide sheets of open ice. The Russian attacks formed in the open, approached in the open, and were pressed home in the open against an entrenched defender well supplied with machine guns. The tanks moved in ungainly clumps, and the infantry attacked in dense human wave formations. It was the Somme in miniature. To the Finns who witnessed these attacks, it seemed beyond belief that any army, no matter how fatalistic its ideology or inexhaustible its supply of manpower, would continue to mount attack after attack across such billiard table terrain. Meanwhile, north of Lake Ladoga, Finnish commander Carl Gustav Mannerheim has called in reinforcements for the men defending at Tolvajärvi to try to stop the Soviet advance that threatens the railway, their main supply artery to the isthmus. The Finns plan a counterattack for the 11th, but the Russians jumped the gun the night before. A Russian battalion penetrates the forest north of Lake Tolvajärvi and hits the Finnish supply line behind the main army positions. There is no defense here, just field kitchens, and the Finns should be routed. Instead, the attackers stop to eat from large simmering vats of sausage soup, and all momentum is lost. An improvised counterattack largely composed of cooks, clerks, and medics, organized and personally led by Aaro Pajari, an attack known to posterity as the Sausage War, follows. This is one of the few instances of bayonet fighting in this winter war, and is brutal,
terrifying.
close quarters combat. But when some Finnish frontline troops finally arrive at 4 a.m., the Russians retreat. The main battle for Tolvajärvi takes place the 12th, and though the Finns are 4 or 5 times outnumbered, it results in a big Finnish victory, the first of the war. In fact, the Russians have as many as 5,000 killed and another 5,000 wounded. The Finns just around 100 killed and another couple hundred wounded. Yep, the Russians took around 50 times as many casualties. This is not only great for Finnish morale, it makes heroes of Finnish officers Pajari and Paavo Talvela. There is a lot of sympathy for the Finns around the world.
I don't live in a warm area. I mean, there's snow on the ground outside where I live right now. It's the northeast of the USA, New England. It's not warm in the winter by any means, but Finland, it's easier to see on a globe, but Finland, I'm like, if you see my cursor, if you draw a straight line of latitude, I believe, or is this latitude? No, this is latitude. I would come in like the northern Spain area. And so you are like another 1,000 miles at least north of where I am. The temperatures must be a different type of brutal cold.
The League of Nations meets and decides to intervene. The Soviets do not recognize this.
Crap.
This is not only great for Finnish morale, it makes heroes of Finnish officers Päijäri and Paavo Talvela. There is a lot of sympathy for the Finns around the world. The League of Nations meets and decides to intervene. The Soviets do not recognize this offer of mediation, so on the 14th, the USSR is expelled from the League of Nations. There is also a fair amount of talk among the Allies for sending military aid to the Finns. But practically, that's a really tough order to carry out in Arctic winter. And there's also the fact that you'd be declaring war on the Soviet Union while you're still at war with the Germans. Britain, for example, doesn't really yet have enough weapons for its own army, let alone a bunch to spare for a nation fighting another nation that is not at war with Britain. They do send 30 Gloucester Gladiator biplanes, for which the Finns must pay cash.
This is the thing about the Soviets. I know the Soviets were crucial, maybe the most crucial element that ended up in the defeat of the Germans in World War II. Okay? I recognize that. But they were also clearly taking advantage of the chaos that Germany was starting. And rather than like, and this, you know, I know America, like always, joins in late, and so America can't talk much. But it really seems, although they were crucial in ending the war, they also were complacent in just taking advantage of the chaos for their own thing. I mean, they even invaded a lot of Poland when Germany went in. And so I'm not saying that the Soviet Union is equal in blame for starting the war as the Germans. Of course not. But they did take advantage of Germany doing what they did. And so I don't know if that's talked about enough.
Apparently, if they're Gladiator playing
guys, by the way, let me know if you think that's wrong or whatever. Please, obviously, let me know that.
Another nation that is not at war with Britain. They do send 30 Gloucester Gladiator biplanes, for which the Finns must pay cash. Apparently, French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier promises the Finns 100 planes and 50,000 men by the end of February. Spoiler, these will not arrive. There were Swedish volunteers forming, though, as the Swedish government permits a private initiative on the 12th to recruit and equip a volunteer force.
Okay.
There is action, though, this week in the European war at sea. British Commodore Henry Harwood brought his squadron to the South Atlantic, hoping to catch the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee.
Sorry, so either last episode or 2 episodes ago, I heard that no one, not even the Swedish or Norwegians, were sending aid to Finland right away. And I was a little confused because I was told by other people that Sweden actually did give aid and to the Finns, right? And so they were talking about this moment, not right at the start of the Soviet-Finnish war here.
South Atlantic, hoping to catch the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee. Harwood has the heavy cruiser Exeter and 2 light cruisers Ajax and Achilles. On the 13th, the Battle of the River Plate, a fierce 2-hour battle off Montevideo, Uruguay, is fought. Exeter and Ajax are pretty hard hit. Spee is damaged, but not so heavily, and retreats into the port to make some repairs and treat the wounded. Ajax and Achilles wait outside the port. By the 17th...
Wow, so there actually was some conflict near South America during World War II.
The British heavy cruiser Cumberland has arrived on the scene.
Does that mean that every continent then was, in at least some way, facing some sort of combat? Besides Antarctica, obviously. So truly a world war.
That, by the 17th, Ajax and Achilles wait outside the port. By the 17th, the British heavy cruiser Cumberland has arrived on the scene. That day, Spee's captain Hans Langsdorff decides to scuttle his ship rather than fight a hopeless battle that will only cost many lives. An audience of thousands watches. Captain Langsdorff is interned and commits suicide the 20th. The British public gets a morale boost of its own from this victory. The only action they've heard about has been the confetti war over Germany the past few months. Over 118 million propaganda leaflets had been printed and dropped. So this is at least something concrete. It also distracts from the news on the 12th that the destroyer HMS Duchess sinks after a collision with the battleship HMS Bartham off the Scottish coast. 124 men died. And so the week ends with a naval battle in the South Atlantic, Chinese successes against the Japanese, the League of Nations taking action, and the Finns not just holding off the Red Army, but beating it again and again. In this series, and my earlier chronological series on World War I, we try to tell the story as even-handed as we can. In that series, for example, we don't call anyone the good guys or the bad guys. They're merely enemies. This series is a bit different, with all of the instant atrocities committed by both the Germans and the Soviets against the beaten Poles, and what the Nazis have planned for the future. I get that it's a lot more obvious who the bad guys maybe are, but our goal is still our goal. And I do have to say today that for all of its incompetence in terms of leadership and tactics, the Soviet Red Army is one of the world's mightiest fighting forces, and it has an almost inexhaustible supply of men. So when that army invades a country a fraction of its size, and the defenders, at this point, are beating the pants off the mighty invader, I have to say this: way to go, Finland! If you want to see another naval episode, one with swashbuckling action on the high seas as the Orgel plays cat and dog with the Soviet Navy and the German Kriegsmarine, it's right here. You can follow this war day by day on Instagram, the link is below, and if you have not already, please join the Time Ghost Army on Patreon or at timeghost.tv. Our war effort does sincerely need you, and every dollar counts. See you next time.
Okay. Great episode. You know where he says here, the good guys, bad guys thing? You know, who the good guys or bad guys? When it comes to modern day, like current conflicts where calling someone a good or a bad guy can have some repercussions, I understand. But when it comes to talking about history, I don't like thinking of anyone, no matter how little atrocities or many atrocities or bad, or like what we would consider bad or good things had they happen in our time right now. I don't like using the term good or bad guy, because it makes this sort of assumption that like I'm trying to look at history in a way to look good to people around me today. I'm just trying to learn history, okay? And calling something good or bad gets rid of that more scientific approach to learning that is not useful. So, you know what I mean? And so I would like to talk about Germany the same way I would like to talk about the Roman Empire, or USA in some instances, or the Mongols in one way. I don't like... It seems like calling something good or bad guy is for other people around you today looking at you learning. I don't care about that. My only motive is to learn about things, and so the good bad guy approach, I don't like it at all, for learning reasons. So, very interesting. Great video, as always. Love y'all. Hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. Do you disagree with anything I say? Do you think anything I said was stupid? Call me out. Any answers to questions I had, you guys are always great with that. And hopefully I'll see you guys next video. Bye, guys.